Thomas Victor Jones, born in Pomona, California. Well, John was just a great person, and it's very hard to describe somebody like this because he just was that way. And I don't know anybody that didn't like him, although I don't think he tried to be liked. He just naturally was likable. I would trust him completely. He's a person that made judgment about people, but he didn't advertise that judgment. He didn't talk negative about anybody. But again, you knew that people that were his friend were a friend for life. I think he would cut you a lot of slack if you were a friend. You could make a mistake or two. I came to Northrop in August of 1953, and I met Johnny very quickly after I arrived. With Johnny, I never quite understood he was capable of being in the business part, but he was much more interested in piloting the airplanes. But he's good. He's a smart guy. He became one of the people that was with Northrop that I immediately, more than liked, I learned to trust. He was had a lot of curiosity about things. He usually pursued that, his curiosity in finding out about that. He was exceedingly interested in airplanes. He just liked everything about them. And as I say, he flew them. And he's had some pretty narrow escapes, and he's crashed a few. And in all those cases, though, he handled himself with a lot of courage. You liked him. He's a good human being. And he was a lot of fun. He enjoyed what he was doing. He would joke about it. You say this about some people, one of a kind. Well, John was one of a kind. I can't give you anyone else who was like Johnny Myers. It's a very good sense of humor. He had to have. Some of the stuff he got into, and very dangerous things, but he never dramatized anything. In fact, he used to laugh because I think she was on the board of directors of Bank of America. And when they'd take a trip, he would go as a spouse. He always laughed about that. I'm a spouse. And she was beautiful. She was a good friend of my wife. And she was a great person. And John was clearly in love with her. Oh, he did the things that a rancher needs to do. He had a lot of property up there, and he loved it. It's in the foothills of the Sierra Mountains. Yes, he had integrity. Well, I don't think he would ever do anything other than what he thought was accurate and proper. Well, he had that Pacific Air motive and did a very good job at that. And everything he did was done well. Johnny said, well, why don't you fly up with me? I said, okay, let's go. Because we would go there for about a week at a time. And a group of us in aviation people, all of them. And my wife heard about it and said, Tom, John is a great pilot, and he's a great friend, but he's also 90-some-odd years old. So I think I'm going to divorce you if you fly up without a co-pilot. And so I told Johnny, and he says, well, sure, I'll get one of our guys to come along. And he did. And it happened to be a pretty rough day. Well, in those mountains with the wind blowing, it can be pretty rough and everything. But we landed, and as we went to the ranch house, where there were other aviation people there, and as I walk in, here's Russ Meyer, who's the president of Cessna. And we were flying in Johnny had a Cessna Citation 10, and And Myers in the front of the room said, "Tom, for God's sakes, I spent years established the name, and it's a single pilot airplane. Now, how in the hell are you?" I thought that was so funny. We all laughed about it. Well, Gus was his dog. And then Gus would take him everywhere he went. And Gus would get into that airplane and sit right next to John, in between. And he a lot of times he wouldn't tell people that Gus was the dog, but he'd say, "Yes, I've got a co-pilot. His name is Gus." He never lacked curiosity. He always had it. And he appreciated things. And he lets you know when he appreciated them. That's one of the things that made John so pleasant to everybody. If he saw something that looked nice and good, he'd compliment the person. "Gee, this is fantastic. This is good." That's the kind of guy he was. You like to be around him. Well, one thing I would say, I appreciated him as a man, very much so, because he did a lot of really great things. He never put himself in the act, ever. He'd usually diminish it a little bit, not maudlin, but he'd say, "Oh, hell." I'm sure you've heard about him having that helicopter accident up there, and I guess he, I don't know what happened. I think the tail rotor malfunctioned, and so the airplane around, and he did a hard landing, and he was pretty well banged up. But he walked, I don't know how far it was, until someone noticing this film. But that's typical of John. And he never made a big deal of it, never talked about it. He would stay out. He liked to visit the camps, you know. He just liked to be around people. And always he'd say, "Well, Tom, we better stop at one more camp." By then it would be midnight or almost 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm ready for bed, but John is still. But it's very social. It's social in a good sense. That's one of the things I guess I liked and appreciated. John had character. He really had character. And you really knew how he was going to act or react. I don't know anybody I'd rather be with if I was in a tough situation than John Myers. And I don't think he would tell. I don't think he would give advice. He'd say, "Go for it. Have fun." That's what he'd say. I know that anybody that knew him as well as I knew him, and he knew an awful lot of people as well as I knew him. They'd all say the same thing. A real gentleman, a lot of fun, serious in a fun way. He enjoyed everything he did. If he didn't enjoy it, he wouldn't do it. Kind of simple. Oh, sure, a lot of skill. You know, it's just like a good basketball player. You know, if you've got the skills, then if you have the character to manage those skills, then you got the combination. That's the test part. What the hell are you doing that for? But if you want to, go ahead. I think he'd say something like that. Because he was a great person, truly. A great human being, courageous, a lot of integrity, but he had control of himself. I can just see him up there, the dog, and yes.
That's a good memory.
That is a good memory. And I think he would like that too.